On behalf of Dallas College and the sustainability team, welcome. Thank you for joining Sustainable Dallas College for our Sustainable You webinar series. My name is Faye Davis, Assistant Director of Sustainability for Outreach and Engagement. This presentation was recorded and produced by the Dallas College LaCroix Center. Thank you to our speakers and to our sponsors. We hope you enjoy this presentation. With a holistic approach to sustainability, Daniel Cunningham is nationally regarded as a leading horticulture expert. Specializing in edible gardens, native pollinator-friendly landscapes, rainwater harvesting systems, and efficient irrigation design, he conducts more than 100 programs each year for both homeowners and organizations. Daniel has a passion for educating organizations and at-home gardeners, and he is here to share his expertise.
Hello, I'm Daniel Cunningham, a horticulturist at Rooted In, which is a local landscape and a design firm, as well as a local nursery that we just started here in the area. Now, I'm especially excited to be here today at Dallas College with the Sustainable You series because I am a product of Dallas College myself and started out at this campus where we are today. One of the things that we try and do with Rooted In is help people have more lush landscapes, more productive vegetable gardens, and more vibrant lawns, but in doing so, being better stewards of our natural resources. Now, currently it's pretty hot outside, and so a lot of folks have taken the gardening aspect inside of their homes. And there really is a lot of benefits to that. Now, certainly many people have seen studies to show that interior plants actually can provide oxygen to their surrounding or interior scapes. As plants photosynthesize, they turn that carbon dioxide into oxygen. Some studies have actually even shown that not only is it the plants that can play that role, but the soil biota inside the pots themselves that can help clean and purify the air, potentially reducing contaminants from interior spaces as well as neutralizing toxins. Now, many of our interior spaces are very closed. There's not a lot of airflow, and whether it's carpets or different, walls and all different types of plastics inside the homes, sometimes they do release some pollutants, and those interior plants can help clean that. We also know that interior plants can help us in terms of our mental health, and coming off the pandemic, I know that is something that has really helped me. We're spending more time doing telecommuting, and inside our homes, the plants, the lush foliage just kind of have more of a calming, relaxing feel. Also, for those business owners and those working from home, you may actually even be able to improve your concentration in productivity by increasing the amount of interior plants that you have inside your home. Now, when we're putting plants inside of our home, we know generally that we're going to have less sunlight than if we were putting plants outside the home. And so just like with traditional landscaping, interior scaping, we want to make sure we're putting the right plant in the right place. Now, laying the foundation, we need to really think about where that sunlight is coming from. So if we look at the aspect of our home here, we can see that generally the sun is always going to rise in the east and set in the west. So the amount of sunlight on your home is going to be higher in the morning on the east side and in the afternoon on the west side, or that sunlight coming through the windows. Now, because we live in the northern hemisphere, it means that the sun is typically going to be during the day coming in more on the south side of the home. Not to mean that there isn't any indirect sunlight coming on the north windows, but primarily those southern windows during the heat of the day are going to get more of the sunlight. So if we're trying to put different plants in different rooms of our house, and as the distance we go away from the window, we want to make sure that they can catch that light and take advantage. Now, we also know, you can see here on this picture, is that during the spring and the fall, the sun is typically kind of at its midpoint in the sky if we look at 12 o'clock noon. As we transition towards the winter, the sun is going to sit lower in the sky, sunlight, and so the angle where the sunlight hits your window is going to be a little bit lower. So you may actually get more direct sunlight deeper into your home as the season changes. Then in the summer, which we are now, the sun tends to be at its highest point, and so you may not get as much sunlight shining through the windows, but it may be more of a reflective light or indirect sunlight. So certain plants inside of our homes are going to have different requirements in terms of sunlight. I actually personally like to put different plants on different windowsills based on the sunlight that they prefer. But I also like to look and always adjust and see, hey, is this plant getting a little bit too much sunlight? Or is this plant maybe not getting enough sunlight? And then you can move them and swap them out. In fact, I have kind of a rotation as I move plants throughout the interior scape of my home to make sure that they're getting the right amount of sunlight. Now, if you are living with someone, and my lovely wife is also a product of Dallas College, and it's amazing, but sometimes we have to find a little bit of a balance. So if she wants to go and open the blinds and let some more sunlight in, if there's a plant in that spot that maybe doesn't like as much direct sunlight, then we need to move that. And so you can move plants around, but if you move a plant that's in a low light environment and really loves low light, and you move it into direct sunlight, you actually could get a little bit of a damage. But just kind of think about that. How much sunlight is a plant actually getting in that space? You don't have to know it all when you're bringing home new plants from the nursery, but just have some time to think about it and look and see, is this plant a little bit more wilted, or maybe it's getting a little bit of bleach in the leaves or lighter colored. Maybe we need to move that one away from the direct sunlight. Or there's other plants, maybe we are in a room that doesn't get as much sunlight. Are there things we can do to move it? Maybe we're putting it on a plant stand. Maybe we're opening the blind a little bit more to make sure that they're getting enough sunlight for those plants to thrive. Now this picture just kind of shows what that is. Many people want to take advantage of any of the sunlight coming through their window, and so you can hang plants in hanging baskets or hanging planters. There's all types of new planters that actually fit in a windowsill and can capture some of that sunlight. As you tend to move plants a little bit further away from that window, it kind of diffuses that light a little bit, and more what we would call indirect sunlight. There are certain plants that really thrive in the lower light environments of the room, so they don't actually want any direct sunlight or indirect sunlight, but maybe it's more reflective light that comes through the home. And then there are certain plants that really don't need much sunlight at all, that can really thrive in those true kind of darker spots, maybe where you're only getting light where you turn in the light. It's kind of a moving target. There's lots of gray area there. Now I wanted to talk a little bit more about containers, and these are the actual vessels that we're putting our plants in. We do want to make sure, especially with interior plants, that those plants have good drainage. So there are certain plants that like lower moisture environment. There are certain interior plants that like more humidity and higher moisture environment, and there's a lot of plants that are kind of in that in between. The plant and the container that they're planted in can kind of affect that a little bit. So we do want to make sure that it's good, that it has good drainage. We never want to use any type of container that ever held toxic materials. So you can use pretty much anything under the sun for a container for an interior plant. Now there are traditional pots, but you also may want to get a little bit creative and use containers, whether it's, recycled food containers. People have seen many times the succulents in an old antique can, and you can do that if it does have good drainage. We do want to deter people from using any clear containers because root systems are evolved to work in the dark soil, and so if it is clear and sunlight's coming through there, it may deter the surface area where roots can actually go. They tend to slough off or die back if they're exposed to sunlight. Now, different pots have different characteristics that may or may not thrive with the plants that put inside them. So certain containers like clay, the terracotta pots, those are actually porous. Wood pots are also a little bit porous too, so they tend to evaporate and lose moisture from the soil, which builds resiliency if you're planting different plants that don't like as much moisture. But if you are planting those higher moisture plants, know that those porous containers are going to lose a little bit more moisture more quickly. Now, non-porous materials, these could be plastic pots or ceramic pots. Those are going to tend to hold the water in the soil profile for a little bit longer. If you were doing metal or dark colored pots and you did have them in direct sunlight, you also should note that those can accept some of the radiant heat coming from the sunlight, and they could stay a little bit warmer longer. That could also mean that they're evaporating more moisture. So that may be just fine for different succulents and low water use plants. It may be a little bit of a challenge for any higher water using plants. So just to remember, the clay or the wood things that are porous tend to dry out a little faster. The plastic or ceramic pots tends to hold a little bit more moisture, and the darker metal pots tend to retain a little bit of heat. But really anything under the sun, the color, the shapes, really are a space for interior scaping that lets us be creative and tie into whatever type of style that meets your needs. Now, you can actually directly plant inside the pot, and so whatever potting media or dirt or soil that you're putting in there would fill the whole inside of the pot, and you're simply planting the plant inside there. My preferred method that builds a little bit more resiliency is what we call the pot-in-pot method. So we're taking maybe a less decorative pot and we're putting it inside the more decorative pot, and that allows us to take it out, do any prunings we need to, different moisture, what have you. If you're using the pot-in-pot method, then you don't actually need a drainage hole. The pot that would be inserted inside there should have a drainage hole, but the ceramic pot or whatever type of container you're using doesn't necessarily have to have a hole in the bottom. If you were to water that, you would want that water to drain out, if it was on some piece of furniture inside your home. If you are using a plant that is directly planted inside the container, then it's a good idea to have a hole inside of the bottom. And those are the containers where we would normally see a saucer at the bottom to collect if there was any water that ran out. But more about that as we talk about watering plants. Now, there are certain pots that you may buy and you absolutely are in love with, but they don't happen to have a hole in the bottom. And that can be solved just by using your drill that has a diamond bit or a masonry bit. It's also a good idea to have some water or some ice on hand in order to make sure that bit doesn't heat up as much. But with any type of concrete or clay terracotta type pots, you can actually fairly easily drill a hole in the bottom. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can find plenty of YouTube videos that'll walk you through that process. If you do have a hole inside your container, inside your home, when you're watering, you don't want the soil or the potting media to drip out the bottom or to fall out the bottom and create a muddy mess. And so many times before we plant, we will put some type of physical barrier. You can buy those, at any indoor nursery or nursery that specializes on interior plants to cover that hole to prevent the soil or the media from washing out. Or you can cut a small little piece of burlap or fabric. You could even use a coffee filter or a dryer sheet to cover up that hole. It still allows for drainage but prevents the soil from coming out. Now, periodically, you may actually want to change the pot or container that you're growing in. That may be because you're growing a plant that has been so successful, it's doubled or tripled in size, and so maybe you want to bump up the pot to a little bit different pot. The other benefit of doing the pot-in-pot method is if you do have a smaller, maybe less aesthetically pleasing pot inside a more ornamental pot, the easiest way to repot it is just to pick that pot up and you can put it into a new container. So that allows some flexibility. If you are repotting plants, and for a mature plant, every 2 to 3 years, it may actually need to be potted up because of what we would call circling or girdling roots. If you feel on the pot and it feels like it's really heavy or it's kind of firm and there's a lot of root mass there, you may actually want to go and clean up that mass of roots, because sometimes it can actually essentially strangle those plants. The roots just continue to grow into themselves. That can affect water and nutrient uptake. Also, if it is more root than potting soil, sometimes it's a little bit harder to get the watering right because there's less resiliency with the sponge-like potting media on the inside. So kind of think about that. If you do have a mass of roots, you can make vertical cuts throughout there. Typically, it's best to do this in the dormant season. So just like exterior plants outside the home have a seasons where they go into a phase where they kind of slow down their physiological processes. It happens with interior plants too. They may not lose their leaves, but they kind of slow down. So, whether it's December, January, February, anytime there's less sunlight coming in the home is a good time to repot, and you can remove any extra roots, and it just is a better time to do that than if they're actively growing and using a lot of energy. Speaking of container media, there's all different types of materials that we could use to make our potting mix. Some plants like a potting mix that tends to drain faster. Some plants like a potting mix that holds on to the water a little bit longer. And so really depends on the species. We can touch a little bit more about that. Typically, if it's a plant like a succulent or a cacti, you do want to make sure that you use a potting media that drains fairly quickly. All different types of potting mixes are typically going to have in them, one of the ingredients is compost. And we know the benefits of compost in our exterior landscapes, but it will also help us to add nutrients, both macro and micronutrients that are released over a long period of time, as well as increasing the potting media's ability to hold on to moisture, but also allow for good drainage where oxygen can still be available to the plant roots. Now, another component of potting media that is more trending when we talk about sustainability is coconut husk. Coconut coir is a substitute for peat moss. Now, peat moss is still a dominant ingredient in many potting soils, but most of our peat moss is going to come from Canada, and it grows inside bogs or wet areas, and they can only harvest so much at a time in terms of being sustainable. The other challenge too is when we use peat and we forget to water for an extended period of time, you'll notice a little bit of that potting soil will pull in on the interior of the pot. You'll have a little bit of a gap there. It becomes what we call hydrophobic, or the fear of water. It actually will shunt the water away, and you can try and soak it, but the water just wants to drain right through. The neat thing about the coconut coir, if you use that ingredient instead, it has less of the potential to become hydrophobic, so it doesn't dry out as much completely as sometimes we see with peat. There are also ingredients. That's a picture of the coconut husk. They come in little bricks, and when you saturate them in a sink or a bucket, they'll just double and triple in size and become very spongy rather. Perlite is a product that's a mineral product that has been heated up to where it expands. If you've ever used lava rocks inside the landscape, it's kind of like a small version of that. It has its potential to increase the permeability of the soil, but also can hold some of that moisture in there, and really kind of a nice 50-50 ratio where the roots have plenty of oxygen and they have plenty of moisture. So if we're trying to improve drainage, perlite is really one ingredient you want to have in potting soil. You also may see vermiculite in potting soils, and Sometimes they're dressed on the top, used like a mulch in a container, or sometimes they're incorporated through the potting mix. These typically are more frequent in tropical plants or plants that like a little bit of a more wet root system. So perlite for the drier plants, typically vermiculite for the more water-loving plants. And then you can also incorporate different gravels. Now, traditionally, people would put gravels at the bottom of the container thinking that that was going to improve drainage. Now we have some pretty good science that shows us that's not always the case, that if you have gravel at the bottom, sometimes it's hard for the moisture to go all the way through your potting media and enter in that gravel layer. And so sometimes you get a little bit of what we call a perch water table. So if you are going to add some type of gravel in terms of functionality, improving drainage, it should be mixed throughout the potting media, but you can also use with your succulents or your more droughty plants to make sure they don't get root rot. You can put a little bit of that gravel on the top of the potting soil, and many of them also add all different types of ornamental value. You could do different colors and textures that are aided with that rock mulch on the top of the container. There's all different types of brands of potting soils, and so you may gravitate towards one that works best for you or works best for a certain plant species, or you can make your own from scratch, but really the sky is the limit. There's a lot of great products out there, and periodically you may, like I said, need to repot. Maybe you want to try another type of potting media there to make sure that it's refreshed and healthy and has all the nutrients it needs. Now, I mentioned pot in pot, and I wanted to kind of show what that looks like. So when you buy plants at the nursery, they come in a little plastic container, right? Well, you can actually leave them in that container and just insert that into your decorative container. Now, I really like this because it prevents any plants from sitting in standing water. So many of my plants that really like good drainage, I'll just take them out of their decorative container, put them in the sink, and several at a time, and then I'll water all those to where the water runs all the way through the bottom of the container, and then I'll wait a couple hours and let all that moisture drip out. So I know that that potting soil is moist, but it's not completely wet. Once it's drained, then I can put it back in that container. Now, if it was a plant, let's say something maybe like a Monstera or maybe a Dracena that can handle a little bit more wet soil, I can water them directly in the pot. And then if a little bit drains at the bottom, it still can aid in humidity as that water evaporates, and maybe a little bit of the roots have a little bit of moisture on them for a few days. That's totally fine, and it can actually be beneficial. But what we want to make sure is if we're doing succulents or things like a snake plant, Sansevieria we'll touch on, that don't like wet roots, that we are actually making sure that before we put them back in those containers, there's not moisture setting in the bottom there. But kind of a great trick. There's also different things that you may want to do in terms of kind of faking what a full pot or container will look like. If you got a really large container, and I'm talking about something that maybe would hold like 5 or 10 gallons of volume of soil, what many people do is if you go to interior scapes, commercial businesses, you used to see this a lot at malls, even North Park still has this, it looks like the pot is completely filled with soil, but many times it's got a little insert inside the top and some type of filler in there, and then it's small containers that are fit inside there, and it looks like it's completely full, but it's just smaller pots that have been set inside there. And I have a picture that kind of shows what this might look like. In those instances, to kind of hide it or disguise what's actually happening inside there, the multiple pots inside the one larger pot, people will use different mosses to put on top of there to kind of just cover it up. And then that plastic container we saw in the previous slide will help to catch any moisture that would otherwise drain out the soil. Now, we mentioned adding compost, and compost isn't necessarily a fertilizer itself. Although there are nutrients available, they're available over an extended period of time. And so we are going to need to fertilize our interior plants because they're limited at what their root system can grow. Unlike exterior plants, they can't grow deep roots and extend out and get nutrients in the soil. So they only have that small little profile to get nutrients from. So we always recommend using a slow release nutrients like an Osmocote. Osmocote has a coating, and there's all different brands that are very similar. They call them coated ureas, but it's just got kind of a waxy-like coating on the outside. And as you water, some of those will break down and different nutrients are available. So it just builds more resiliency, so you're not going to have to fertilize as frequently. There are also liquid fertilizers available, and maybe for your plants that require more nutrients, plants that maybe they're faster growers or they just like a little bit more fertilizers than other plants, you may periodically need to add a little bit of a liquid-based fertilizer. If you're just getting started with interior plants, I would probably lean more heavy on the slow release fertilizer because there's less of a chance of causing damage by over fertilizing. With liquid fertilizers, you really need to pay special attention to what the instructions are on the container. A lot of times people don't measure exactly, or they think it recommends this much, I'm going to put twice as much, so I'll have twice as green plants, and that's not always what happens. Many times it actually causes more harm than good with the liquid fertilizers. So if you add too much, sometimes the plants are going to grow too fast, they're going to grow too spindly, and plants that do that tend to be more susceptible to pest and disease problems. Also, many of the liquid fertilizers have salts. That's actually how they're water soluble and taken up through the plant. So if we're fertilizing too frequently, you may actually notice a little bit of salt buildup, and that's detrimental to our interior plants, especially those that are native to tropical regions. Now, if we aren't adding enough fertilizers, we may actually see some detrimental characteristics as well, like yellowing of the leaves. Ideally, what we would like to do is fertilize with those slow release fertilizers to kind of hedge our bets over longer periods of time so our plants don't become deficient in any of the micro or macronutrients that are important for plant growth. If you notice a plant has kind of slowed down a little bit in growth, if you notice just slight yellowing, whether it's on the new leaves or the older leaves, you probably do want to address that with some type of fertilizer. Ideally, we would like to hit it before they become yellow, but if they're just a little yellow, you can definitely overcome that. There's a lot of different guides online, and again, there's some great YouTube videos and different classes where you can learn more. But typically, if you look at which type of leaves are yellowing, so if it's the bottom leaves or the leaves closer to the top of the plant, are they yellowing from the outside in? Are they yellowing kind of evenly throughout there? Is it more of a spot yellowing? That can help us address what nutrients they may be deficient in. However, if you are adding kind of a balanced fertilizer, they should have both the macronutrients, the nutrients that plants use in large amounts, as well as the micronutrients. They're equally as important, but plants don't use them as much. They're going to be in those different types of fertilizers. Now, if you are wanting to do things organically, which I like to do, especially outside my home, but also inside my home, there are other organic-based fertilizers available. So it could be bone meal, feather meal, fish emulsions, or higher in nitrogen. I would caution though, fish emulsion is actually made from liquefying fish, and so although it's a great organic source of nitrogen, there may be some odors associated with that. So if I do that, I may put plants outside or in a back room until 24, 48 hours, those smells kind of will start to subside. There's also things that are high in phosphorus, like bone meal, seabird guano. If you're not familiar with that term guano, you might type in a Google search, but a great source of organic nutrients, but do maybe have some smells associated with them. And then different types of liquid phosphorus blends. There's also different bags of fertilizers that you'll see Sulpo Mag on there, or sulfur, potassium, magnesium. They have a great source of potassium. Paul Mash also is a good source of potassium. potassium as well as different liquid-based potassium fertilizers. Any fertilizer you buy, whether it's a liquid or if it's a bag, it's going to have 3 numbers on that bag, and that's just a ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, those 3 nutrients that plants use in larger amounts. Now, let's talk a little bit about getting the water right. And I always think with interior plants, especially folks new to gardening indoors, this is the biggest challenge. More often than not, we tend to see people over-loving their plants or over-watering their plants. And so a moisture meter is probably the greatest tool that you can use to make sure that you're not watering too much, but that you are watering enough. They're very simple to use. Typically, they cost between $5 and $10 at your local nursery or hardware store. There's all different types, so we actually sell these at our nursery that are a little ladybug and a frog that are fun to get the whole family involved. But basically, it's got a little kind of copper insert on there. You stick that into the soil profile deeper down, and it will tell you if that plant's dry, meaning that it would need additional water, or if that plant's wet, where you know you don't have to water. Different types of plants may need water, once a week in interior space. They may need water every 2 weeks, or some plants could go without water for a month or 2, and it really just kind of depends on the plant itself. And there is a gray area. It's a moving target. So if we're managing soil moisture, what we want to prevent is oversaturating the soil where all that pore space is just filled with water and there's no oxygen in there. And that happens many times in interior plants that don't have drainage. So that's why I like to kind of water separately from the pot, so I know that I'm never going to have that issue. But moisture meters, a great tool. I think every interior gardener should have them. You can also use them for your exterior plants and your exterior pots as well. How you're going to water it can also change. You can use a watering can if you want to. We'll also show later in some slides some misters that you can use to water. Again, I told you I use just my kitchen sink that has a little kind of pull down stream that I can use to water. Some plants, like our tropical plants, typically they're going to have larger leaves, more lush foliage. They do prefer rainwater or the water, distilled water from inside our home. So Monsteras are one that would like that, Dracaenas, and there are others that you may notice a little bit of yellowing if you're using city water. City water has chlorines, chloramines, and salts in there in order to safely deliver water to our homes. But many of those tropical plants are more sensitive to those. So if you're using rainwater, those additives are non-existent, so you'll actually notice plants tend to be a little bit more vibrant when using rainwater. And then if you don't have access to rainwater and you do have some plants that are a little finicky, distilled water will work. Now, I will tell you, my personal home and all the plants we'll focus on today, they're very easy to grow. They don't need a lot of babying or anything like that to set you up for success. But just knowing some plants are a little bit more finicky with watering. One way to know if perhaps too much salt or chlorine is a problem in your water, you can notice some yellowing on the outside of the leaves or the leaf tips. So that may be a sign where it's like, okay, I'm seeing some of this. Potentially it could be chlorine or salt damage. Unfortunately, also, if you see dry tips, it could be a sign of overwatering or a sign of underwatering. Many times, if you're overwatering, those fine root hairs will start to rot off, and that deteriorates the plant's ability to actually absorb water and nutrients. If you are underwatering, those fine root hairs tend to dry out and you get the same thing. So the result are the same whether you're overwatering or underwatering. That's why really the soil moisture meters and probes help with that. Now, those tropical plants, again, many times it's plants that have large, big, broad, dark green, thick foliage. If you use a mister, you can help control the humidity around that plant. So especially for those more tropical plants, it kind of mimics what we would see in a rainforest. Typically, this is going to be more or less of a problem depending as the season change. So typically during the warmer months, like right now, we have higher indoor humidity because we're running our air conditioners. So the plants may not need as misted as much during the summer months, but in the winter months when we're running our heater, that tends to pull moisture out of the air. So having one of these misters on hand is a good idea. I also like to use these to just water my succulents to make sure that you're not overwatering. Also, I just think they're cool. Now, if you are overwatering, the other thing that we see, unfortunately, with interior plants is what we'll call fungal gnats. And basically, if you have really wet conditions, those conditions are ripe for fungus to grow in the soil profile, and the gnats are going to come in and feed on that fungus. So the easiest way to control those is just to taper off your watering a little bit. Make sure there's not standing water in your containers. The other thing that you could do if you wanted to treat that and prevent the gnats from spreading to other plants inside your home is to use a product called neem oil. There's all different types of fungicides that you can buy at your local nursery, and they'll say, hey, these are rated for treating fungal gnats, but neem oil is organic and it's effective. So we like to practice is what we call IPM, or integrated pest management, where we first identify the problem, the pest we're trying to control, and then we see if we can use cultural control methods like reducing watering, or if we are using chemical control methods like some type of pesticide, that we're starting with organic and then we're transitioning away from that if we can't treat it through organic methods. But neem oil is a great way to control those fungal gnats. I wanted to show here all different types of colors and textures in the foliage with interior plants. There are some that also bloom and add a lot of interest. You could have these in atriums, you could have them in windows, you can put them into different groupings together or mix them based on their structures and the shapes and the forms and the different colors of their foliage. This is a plant I really like, we'll talk about, but it's called Sansevieria. We also call it snake plant, or sometimes mother-in-law's tongue, which is a less nice common name there. But they're really nice and modern interior scapes. They're also very easy to grow. And when you are planting plants that have more linear foliage and contrasting those with something like that Monstera that had a broad foliage, it just makes each plant pop a little bit more. We also like to use variegated plants. Variegated plants tend to make lower light areas inside our homes feel a little bit brighter. They're also more decorative because they add a little bit of a focal point with the streaks of the whites and the yellows inside their foliage. And they're also very on trend right now. You'll notice that there are several online suppliers of interior plants that will sell cuttings of different types of rare variegated plant material, and those could surprisingly range from $100 just for a cutting of kind of a specialty variegated something like a Monstera, to some people are paying upwards of $1,000 just for a cutting. So if you have one of those, maybe you want to learn how to propagate those, and you could have a side job selling interior plants. But there's some that work in any type of space. So whatever style that you like, if you like a more modern style or if you like a more country style, there's going to be an interior plant that fits that role. Also, part of the fun is finding a container or a pot that works well with the plant that goes inside there. And you may even try some out, and I'll do that quite a bit when I'm moving plants around the house. Okay, you're going to go in this pot for a while just to change it up a little bit. Talking about specific species, one plant that is really easy to grow, and remember I said each plant we'll specifically talk about today is going to be easy for the beginning interior gardener to set themselves up for success, but that is the spider plant. Now it is variegated, like I said, so it means just it has streaks of white or yellow inside the foliage. This plant does great in hanging containers or hanging basket. It also does great on plant stands. I really love plant stands because they add architectural and visual interest. So basically any type of just metal or wood container that the pot would sit in. They can also be functional too. So if you have sunlight coming through a window and the sunlight is kind of directly coming in here, but where your plant would fit in terms of its aesthetic interest would be right here, you put it in a planter, and so that can give it a little bit more of a direct sunlight if you need that. Well, these plants work well because they kind of spill over those containers, so it just adds more of an interest. But they're a great plant. They're very easy in terms of water needs. You can water them once a week or once every 2 weeks. Notice though, if you look in the morning, especially during the summer months, if they notice some wilting on them, it's a good sign that you're going to need some irrigation. If you don't have a soil moisture probe, what I'll traditionally do is just take my finger and stick it into the top 2 inches of the potting soil. And if it starts to dry out in those top 2 inches, then I'll go ahead and just give it another drink. But the spider plants are very easy to grow. They're also very easy to propagate. You'll notice small versions of this plant that will attach themselves to the long arching branches, and they'll already be starting to grow roots we call aerial roots. And if you cut those off and put them in another container, you can have a new plant. They're also great pass-along plants to pass along to friends and family. Another plant you could do that with is called the dumb cane. There's all different types of variegated versions of these. They work very well in low light conditions, but it can also handle indirect sunlight. Are very easy to grow. They do need probably once a week watering, but can go a little bit longer than that if you needed to go out of town on vacation or something. They're really not heavy feeders, so primarily you would want to do your fertilizing during the growing season, so spring, summer, and fall. I avoid fertilizing during the winter when they go into that kind of slowed down dormancy. But a great plant, easy to grow for beginning gardeners and resistant to a lot of pest and disease problems. Another really easy to grow interior plant that you don't even need potting soil for are the air plants. There's all different types of air plants that have a variety of colors and textures in their foliage. You could actually put them into pots or containers or hangers. Some people will place them just on different decorative pieces on the wall. And these only need to be watered maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. I'll take them down for whatever I have them hanging on and put them under the kitchen sink and just run them with water. You could even fill up the sink with water if you wanted to. Leave them in there for 10, 20 minutes or so, and then take them off, put them on the wall. If they were in actually some type of display where it was harder to remove them, you can just use that little mister to give them a little bit of water. And they actually have a great physiology where they can take that moisture, humidity from the air to get all they need. Another plant that does really good with that is going to be the Staghorn fern. And I have one of these hanging on a board inside our dining room. Absolutely love this plant. Very, very interesting with kind of its large branching leaves. It tends to be mounted in baskets or those boards covered with potting soil and then covered with moss. And then again with this one, periodically I'm just going to soak that, whether I take it from the wall and put it in my sink. Usually that's about once a week. You can also mist it if it's in a dry area in the winter. Periodically. Doesn't need a lot of water, but if you do notice it starting to dry out, that's a good time to water it. It can handle a little bit of direct sunlight. I would protect it from the west sun. Many of our plants that like lower light conditions, if they get west sun that's directly coming through the window, they can get a little sun scald in the leaves. And so that's why when you're working with, whether it's, a family member or a roommate, if they open the blinds and it lets more direct sunlight on a plant that isn't normally exposed to that, it can be a little bit problematic. So just know that if you are opening the blinds, that it's getting a little bit of diffuse or filtered light, but they can also handle, indirect sunlight, any type of conditions where it's just bright reflective light. They do very well. Monstera, probably the most popular plant we'll talk about today. It is really known for its large, broad leaves that have kind of gaps gaps or holes inside them. We call it deeply lobed. There's a lot of variegated versions, so you can get different colors of white and creams and light greens on there that add a lot of interest. Again, some of the variegated, depending on the type of variegation, they can be very valuable plants to grow. So if you buy one small and you're successful with it, it can actually, become worth hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. These do like well-draining soil, but they may require a little bit more frequent irrigation. So maybe check on them. Again, maybe the finger test or sticking the soil probe in once a week and making sure that they're not drying out, especially during the growing season, spring, summer, into fall. Now, one plant that is so bulletproof that anybody can grow is going to be the pothos, or sometimes people call it the devil's ivy, because I think probably because it's freaked people out how easy it is to grow and how long it can go without nutrients or water or even soil. People make cuttings and put this in water with no added nutrients, and they live for months and months and months. My personal favorite pothos are going to be the ones that have variegated foliage. There's all different cultivars. I personally have all three of these plants at my home, and so they add a little bit of interest, breaking up the dark green leaves of the plants inside the home and kind of do make it feel brighter in lower light areas. Don't need a lot of water, don't need a lot of sunlight, but if you give them too much water and too much sunlight, they're really resilient there. It's, like I said, pretty hard to kill or cause any damage to that plant. And that's just many of the plants that you can grow inside the home, but there are hundreds more, and we would love to talk about those plants with you if you visit our nursery, a brand new nursery in Pilot Point, which is just between downtown Pilot Point and downtown Salina, where we only sell the easiest interior plants to grow. If you'd like to learn more, you can also stay tuned for many of the other programs that are happening through the Sustainable U series at Dallas College, and we hope to be back and talk to you soon.
Thank you, Daniel, for that presentation. How informative that was.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So my first question is, when did you first know that you had a talent and a passion for growing things?
Yeah, one of my first memories was actually in the garden with my great-grandmother, so young that I don't think I could walk on my own, that I was hanging on to her tomato cage. And through life and elementary school and as an adolescent, there was a neighbor that had a vegetable garden in her backyard. And then, as I got a little bit older, going to a native plant sale and enjoying the benefits that plants have, not only for feeding us and their aesthetic value, but that they could provide food for butterflies and other pollinators. It just really resonated with me, and that's how I like to spend my time, in sixth grade or getting home from football practice and going and spending time in the garden. It also was a way for me to recharge my batteries, and it really wasn't until later in life that I figured out, you could actually do this for a job, and people will pay you to grow plants and to teach people about plants. But they may not pay you very much, but it's definitely something that you can do for a career, and it's given me a lot of fulfillment.
Wonderful. Good. So I know this process, growing things, can be very intimidating for a lot of people, myself included.
Sure.
It seems very technical. It seems like you really have to know what you're doing. But from your presentation, I've realized that's really not the case. Anybody can, have a houseplant and start that process.
Sure.
So to the novices out there, if you had to choose one houseplant to start with, and I know you went through a few, if you had to choose just one, which one would you choose?
Yeah. I get that question a lot, and it's like, I only have one child, so when people ask if your favorite kid, with plants is a little bit harder. I would say probably if someone was just getting into interior gardening, the snake plant is really hard to beat. It's probably neck and neck with the pothos, like I said, But that is one plant. Somebody came into our nursery the other day and asked if we carried fake plants or artificial plants inside, and we don't. But I said the snake plant is the closest thing you can get. The reason that they wanted artificial is because they were afraid that they were going to kill something. And I know that it can be a little bit overwhelming, especially I think people take it to heart when they kill a plant. There's some type of, they did something wrong, or it's a little bit depressing, and I know we've all had a hard time, and that's part of growing plants. It should be a good experience. And with the snake plants, if you forget to water it for a few weeks, the plants are just fine. If you overwater it and you notice it, that's something that can be remedied fairly quickly. If you forget to fertilize, if you have it in the wrong light condition, they're just really resilient. And so I would start there with some of the easy to grow plants and figure out what works for you and what doesn't. I mean, based on your lifestyle, based on how much time you have to give to it. I always like to say, fake it till you make it. And you'll figure out the little nuances of, this plant likes it here and this plant, prefers it over here. And know that you're going to kill plants. It's a part of gardening. People think, you're, horticulturist, you have a master's in horticulture, you don't kill any plants. I've killed tens of thousands of plants in a field setting, inside my own home, at our nursery, and that's just part of it. But when you do figure out what works for you, it does bring a lot of that enjoyment and fulfillment and stress relief and all that. So I think it's a worthwhile effort, even though there may be some hiccups along the road.
Thank you for saying that.
Sure.
It can be an intimidating process, but it's nice that you said that you've killed plants too. It does.
Sure. And maybe even this week. I mean, the jury's still out.
Yeah, that is a terrible feeling. It does feel like you've done something very, very wrong. but I'm glad that you're saying that we're all kind of on the same level when it comes to plants. Like we can all take care of them.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Wonderful. So my next question is, so you touch very lightly on just the benefits of having houseplants. Can you dig deeper into that? What are the benefits that people experience when having houseplants?
Sure. One that is really interesting to me right now is horticultural therapy. I know everyone in America and across the globe really is connected in the past 2 years dealing with a very stressful situation. Over the past few years, we've seen an increase in gardeners, like 26 million new gardeners just in America, whether it's people are spending more time at home, and there are all the other stresses, associated with inflation and job security and all that. And so for me, plants really help add a calming effect to our life. It's also a hobby that we can focus on and maybe for a short period of time not think about all of life's distractions. Specifically as it applies to interior plants, we know that it's good for our physical health, whether that's improving the oxygen in our interior places and helping to filter out some of the pollutants, but also if we take that and leverage it outside of the gardening, we know that that can be better for our physical health and the activity of actually gardening and getting outside and getting some of that fresh air. Interior plants are one of the fastest growing aspects of gardening. I think it's really special too because I learned gardening, many of the components from my great-grandmother and my grandmother, but it's also very popular with millennials and Gen X and Gen Z. And so I think it's special that it's kind of generational, that it connects multiple people together. I personally love passing on my love of gardening to my 3-year-old daughter. And so I think it helps us to build community as well as, just, doing something that makes us feel good. And it's more than just a hobby to me.
Yes, thank you. Yes. And building that community is so important now more than ever. So,
yeah,
yes.
Plant people are generally very understanding and willing to learn too. So if you know somebody that's into gardening and you're trying to learn, most people are an open book and are willing to help.
Yes. So is a house plant always a house plant, or can it be taken outside into your garden?
Sure. So I used to work for the state in my past two previous roles, and when you're a state employee, the answer would be, it depends, right? It's a little bit frustrating, but to dig deeper into that, most of the interior plants would be just interior plants here in Texas because we deal with extreme weather. So whether it's the 100+ temperatures that we see during the summer, or recently we've seen negative degree temperatures outside. So if it was a tropical plant, it may really have a challenge growing in those conditions. Now, that's not always true. One plant we mentioned today was the cast iron plant, or the aspidistra. That actually will grow outside in Texas in shady spots, and so you can do that. There's also some of the other succulents that would grow inside as well as outside. So echeveria is one of those, but a lot of the succulents, the different sedums, the kalanchoe, are cold hardy and can grow outside, but those would be the two things that I would look at. Is if you wanted to plant it outside, could it withstand the extreme heat during the summer and withstand the extreme cold during the winter? And there is the potential that there's a few plants that would do that. There are also plants that we could grow outside for much of the year. This could be, if you're interested in edibles, like citrus. So citrus grow really well in pots. So if we were talking about lemons and limes, but they're not going to be able to withstand 10 degrees or 20 degrees temperatures we get in an average winter. Mm-hmm. So you could bring those, and those could be interior plants for 3 months of the year, but then after the danger of the last frost is passed, in March, we could move them outside again. So could be kind of anywhere on that spectrum.
Thank you. And so how often should you change out the soil in your house plant?
Yeah, so that could also depend. Generally, it's with the faster growing plants, the plants that can actually grow a little bit larger more quickly. That root mass at some point is going to exceed the volume of that container. In fact, sometimes with like the snake plants or the sansevierias, they can actually break that plastic container that's inside there because the volume of roots have grown. So I would look at, every 2 to 3 years, looking and seeing, hey, is this plant, you can feel the outside, is it too firm? Do you see any roots growing out of the bottom? At that point, I would go and do what we call a root pruning. So making vertical cuts, removing any masses of roots that would there, and then growing it in a container that's slightly bigger, so maybe 2 inches or so bigger in width. We call that potting up. You can also refresh the potting soil. So if there's any potting soil, that doesn't have as many nutrients, or maybe it's got salt buildup on there, you can just gently remove that from the roots, whether it's with a water hose or just with your hand shaking it into a trash can or a compost pile. And then you can refresh it with new potting soil, a new slow release fertilizer. And this could also, you can see signs that the plant doesn't like it. So if the plant was drying out too quickly, or perhaps it was staying too wet, or you see some type of chlorosis or yellowing in the leaves, that could also be a sign that maybe it's time to go ahead and repot that plant. But depends on the plant, but generally I'll repot mine every 2 to 3 years.
Thank you. My final question is, please tell us about Rooted In. What all do you offer at Rooted In?
Yes, so we started out as an educational firm. We do a lot of environmental education, partnering with most every city around the north central Texas area. So we teach classes, ranging from interior plants to growing fruits and vegetables, to ornamental plants that are great for pollinators, a lot of classes on native plants. We also do classes on rainwater harvesting and irrigation, but you name it. If it has to do with plants and water, it's definitely something we nerd out on. We also have branched out into a landscape design and installation firm. So many times we would get questions, will you come to our house and actually just tell us what to plant? And so we tried to help folks with that respect, whether on a limited budget or if you want to do a full-blown landscape design, we can help. And then through the classes and through the landscape designs, we really try and spec the most sustainable plant materials. So those that are going to use less water, less fertilizers, those that give back to the environment. But some of those plants have historically been a little bit harder to find at our regional nurseries. And so to answer that question of sourcing the plant material, we recently this year just started a nursery where that's really what we focus on. It is a money-making venture for us. We love to sell plants, but more importantly, what we want to do is set people up for success. So any plant that you buy from our nursery is going to be one that's easy to grow, that will grow within our environment, and we really try to pair that with education so we can set folks up for success as much as possible and help them find the right plant for the right place.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us today.
Thank you.
This was wonderful. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We will see you next time.